Cloud. Welcome to the first official guest of the semester of 2020. It's not often we can start a week with a guest and ignore the syllabus altogether, but that's what we're going to do here. Not only do we have a guest, but we have what's called a special guest because this is the person who understands the history of this course, why it exists, where it comes from, what's happening today, and not only that, he's a futurist. So we have the past, present, and future with us today. It's a privilege to have Dr. Marty Siegel with us from the School of Informatics because he's a member of the School of Education in IST. And those of you master's students, doctoral students in IST, this is a person you could have had on your committee, but he's going to retire, unfortunately. But he'll be around. You invite him to the defense and he'll show up. Dr. Siegel had a degree in educational psychology from the University of Illinois, which is known for the Center for the Study of Reading and Supercomputers and all sorts of things. I was to the north at the University of Wisconsin.
The invention of the first browser.
The invention of the first browser and the invention of Plato, which we'll be talking about today. I was at Wisconsin, which was the Center for the Study of Math. In Indiana here, we were the Social Studies Center. Different centers set up all around the world that focused on different things. And there are a lot of cognitive psychology people in Illinois that created really the field that we study in educational psychology today. That's where it comes from, and that's where his career evolved from. Marty has had an interesting career, and we're going to be hearing about some of that today. Those in class on Monday heard a lot about it and a lot of stories about his career, and we're going to extend that. We're going to go back a little bit to what he talked about Monday, a few topics, but then we'll continue and push ahead a little bit as well. I've been fortunate to know him since I arrived in the School of Ed in 1992. The building was built in 92. We were taking the tape off the elevators when we arrived and in our offices and so forth. It was a magical time. It really was this unique moment that we faculty, the 100 or 110 faculty, lived and breathed every day. The exuberance, the excitement, the happenings, the collaborations, the people that were around at IU in the 1990s was very, very unique. And it didn't happen by happenstance. Indiana, as a state of Indiana, supported technology in education, and it evolved to create a new building. So we'll be talking about some of that today. So welcome, Marty.
Thank you.
We can't cover your entire career in the time we have, but we can hit many, many highlights and go in some magical moments and pull some wisdom embedded in it. I've got questions, I've showed you them. In reflection of it, since you left on Monday and you had 3 days to think about it, were there anything that you didn't say or topics that you didn't cover or things that you would like to mention, things that as you were walking back, oh, I should have mentioned him or this project or anything like that?
Oh, there's so many stories that I could talk about, but no, I think I hit the highlights of what I wanted to express the other night. So I really, because you heard that, I think it might be appropriate for you to guide me, like what you'd like me to talk about today.
Keep in mind, there are 22 students in the online class that weren't there Monday.
Right.
So was there, I don't want you to repeat all of Monday, but is there one or two nuggets that we could start with that you want to mention about your career before we get into the extension part?
Well, you know, the funny part of my career is that I've been in computing, one form or another, all of my life. But I mentioned to the class on Monday that the one computer science class I took, I was an undergraduate at the University of Illinois, as well as a master's student and a PhD student, and then hired onto the faculty. but the one course I took in computer science, I didn't do very well. And the professor said, Marty, I'll pass you if you promise me you'll never go into computing. And I said, okay. And then, you know, as luck would have it, or fate would have it, there I was in computing, which I don't know what that says, but it's ironic for sure.
They're probably saying the same about me, by the way. and like many of us, I was planning to get a master's degree and get on with it and go run a software company or do something else. I didn't plan it for a PhD. I mean, a lot of things just happen and you do them. You know?
A lot of things just happen. And so, you know, when you meet, I know when I meet students who have all these very detailed plans for the next 20 years of their life, it makes me smile a bit because I don't think life typically unfolds that way.
And you definitely had this evolution. I've actually got a question related to that just in a little bit. I'm really intrigued to find out if there's some coherence there. But before they could even understand the coherence, you have to talk a bit about Illinois and what was happening in Illinois. And at the time, there was this project called Plato, that there's a book you can read for your midterm and do a midterm assignment around the book and maybe interview Dr. Siegel more about it. If you get the book, pages 180.
It's even an audiobook. You could hear
it is.
Yeah, it is.
188 is right there. 188, 189, 190. Do you remember what the Plato Project even stood for?
Program logic for automated teaching operations.
Hey, if you remember, Engelmann and I had a project at IU called the Ticket Project. You get the ticket. You need acronyms in education. The dean didn't know what the hell it stood for, but he supported the ticket. Teacher Institute for Curriculum Knowledge about the Integration of Technology, TICKIT. People love acronyms, especially in the military, but in education too. You can't get funded without one. Can you tell them a bit about Plato and the evolution of Plato, the timeline of Plato and that kind of thing?
So Plato actually began in the 1960s, and it began with sort of a challenge in a way. There were these things called Skinner boxes. B.F. Skinner,
who was in our psychology department down the block for a while.
a behaviorist. He really was core to that whole way of thinking, and you know, he created these Skinner boxes for raising his daughter, actually, using behavioral principles, but that led to the design of possibly teaching machines. I think he tried the first examples of that, which weren't all that successful, but this started, you know, people started figuring this out, how to do it, and they were very mechanical and clumsy and difficult, and, you know, you'd had to put in tapes or paper or cardboard or wheels or what, you know, whatever. And at the same time, computers were coming into being. Of course, computers were simply, at that time, just used for scientific processing or for maybe accounting or business purposes. But someone raised the question at the University of Illinois, couldn't we use these computers for teaching and use them as the ultimate teaching machine? And there were several people who tried it. There was a lot of competition between a few people, but it turned out this very bright, I don't know if he was an undergraduate at the time or he was just a graduate student, but he was really early in his graduate career, by the name of Donald Bitzer. And he was an electrical engineer. And he said, you know, I'd like to try that. And he did. He got a cathode ray tube, and he hooked it up. He enlisted some other people as well. and they created the first, what we call Plato 1 terminal. And it was, clunky and all of that. But there's something really important about this history that I'm not even sure it got captured in the book. But I remember Don Bitzer talking about this, and it really stuck with me. And it's that he said, if we take this machine, because a lot of people thought, oh, this is going to be a great research device, and we could really study this and try to find, what are the optimal paths for education, et cetera, et cetera. He said, that's fine. We could do research, but the move that I think was so impressive on his part is he said, let's put it in front of some students. And I can't remember who the first students were. It might have been teaching French or maybe nursing. I'm not sure who the first group was, but that notion that let's take whatever we build at whatever level it is and put it in a classroom with a real teacher and real students and see what happens was key to the eventual development of the Plato system and all of its many-year evolution. That way of thinking. So it wasn't like, we'll just keep it in the laboratory until we perfect it, because I think if he had gone that route, we would have ended up with this device that would work kind of well in the laboratory, but when you put it in the real world, it wouldn't work. And so we learned so many things by just implementing it immediately. And of course, in the modern day Silicon Valley, phraseology of things, you hear it as, fail early and fail often. It was the same notion. Get it out there. Get your product out there. Beta as quickly as possible.
Yeah, 1.9 version.
Yeah.
In the book somewhere, he's interviewed me. He's asked the question about the theory behind it, and he says he really didn't think about the theory. It just evolved. And in Illinois, it was known for cognitive theory, and before that, behavioral theory and so forth. You can read about it early on. They have B.F. Skinner, and I worked with B.F. Skinner's daughter, not the one raised in the Skinner box when I was in West Virginia. So I talked to B.F. Skinner on the phone shortly before he died, actually, once. But interesting person. And if you read the prequel to My World is Open in this week's assignment, you can read about this evolution that Marty talks about in the Skinner and how we move beyond the phases it's moved through. So you want to address your perspective as a psychologist, educational psychologist. You're coming in on a project like this. Did you see any theories resident or principles that were embedded in this?
Well, what's interesting to me is before I got involved, I was from my sophomore year as an undergraduate through graduate school, I was involved in this program with two people called Bereiter and Engelmann.
Really, Bereiter?
Yeah,
Carl Bereiter.
Carl Bereiter and Siegfried Engelmann. Ziggy has recently passed away, brilliant educator. And they created what's now called sort of direct instruction. But that Bereiter-Engelmann program was a preschool program, and it was quite controversial because it really tried to prescribe in a deep instructional design sense how to deliver instruction to kids. And it was kind of scripted. Well, you know, as soon as you tell teachers that things are going to be scripted, you know, there's this huge rebellion. But they believed it wasn't so much that we're trying to control teachers. We cared more about the kids learning, and we had to carefully structure the materials. And I got involved in that because it was actually by accident how I got involved. I won't tell that story now, but it's interesting. You know, I thought at first I was observing a program for gifted African American children.
Mm.
And because they were performing at really high levels. These are like 5-year-olds doing sophisticated math, I mean, even equations, and reading at probably at least a second grade level, and doing sort of these language logic things. So I thought, oh man, and these were, really gifted kids. And I was hanging around, and Ziggy came and he asked me who I was and what I was doing. And I said, I'm just fascinated. He said, do you want to get involved? I said, sure. He said, well, you could be, sign up for this course. And it was like a special ed 459. And I said, wait a second, I'm a sophomore. That's a graduate class. So he said, oh, that's okay. Just bring me the paper, I'll sign it. You'll get in it. Yeah. So there I was sitting with master students as a sophomore. Yeah. Talking about intimidation. But we learned how to teach. And what was so interesting is we were designing instruction for these little kids, and we were trying to be very systematic. Okay. Number of years later, I'm asked to go over to to Searle, the computer-based education research laboratory, to talk to the director, Don Bitzer now. Now he has this whole big complex.
Why were you asked to go there?
I was asked to go there to see if we could teach reading and math and language skills on this computer. Plato and Searle had recently won a very large National Science Foundation grant. Mm. And so they wanted, some educational presence, obviously, to demonstrate this project. And so he was interviewing different people. And I was asked to go over there. And I told this story the other night, but I walked away that in that first meeting saying, I don't think it can be done because your computer doesn't have ears, and how would it hear if a kid said the word man or fan or ran and so on. And so I just shrugged my head, but I didn't like that I was saying that it can't be done, because I think maybe I'm just not smart enough. So you shouldn't say that things can't be done. It's just like, well, I don't know how to do it. But I thought about it that night, and I came back the next day uninvited, but I walked into the director's office and I said, here's some thoughts you might consider. And he said, now that's what I was looking for the day before. And that's really how I got involved, in that program, because at that point I was getting my PhD. I thought I was leaving Illinois, but I ended up staying there as a faculty person. Now, bringing all this together is that I thought it was interesting that in some way, I mean, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but in some way, the Bereiter Engelmann program was trying to get teachers to behave more like computers, in the sense that they would be more consistent in their delivery and precise and so on. And here was a computer system that was trying to get, computers to be more like teachers and free-flowing and so on. I thought, there's a happy medium here. Couldn't we, bring these two ideas together? And that's what we did, actually.
My dissertation was based on Carl Bereiter and Marlene Scartamelia's later work on knowledge building. And we have a guest in 2 weeks in the School of Ed, I haven't sent you the link for, who's going to talk. He's from Albany, University of Albany. He's going to talk about knowledge building based on that work. I saw Carl Bereiter in April, and I have a picture with him at AERA, and Marlene Scartamelia, his wife, but they evolved into social constructivistic kinds of things, and having kids build databases of ideas that they juxtapose their papers on. They have a paper on one screen, the database of ideas another screen, and maybe some notes or some timelines in that. So they're building knowledge as a community of peers. The papers go up into this database, kind of like social media, and everyone can borrow and pick and cite and so forth. And it's a kind of social networking. It's very, very, very interesting stuff. While I was building computer prompts and writing, and they had built, they wrote a book, The Psychology of Writing, while you were in reading. And so we built prompts for kids to reflect on their writing and a keystroke mapping system that recorded all of that stuff. Anyways, lots of things you've said there. And I would like for you, like Monday, I'd like for you to talk about what your highlight in this book, or the one where Brian pulled your part out, is when you worked with incarcerated people in Illinois. They call it, and by the way, well, they call it Plato Corrections Project. And it was funded for a long time. And when the Carter administration took the place of Nixon had funded it, and Carter then went to cut funds. Then the Republican project would be cut, and unfortunately, so then the state took over and provided a couple $100,000 a year, which is a big thing, until about 1988. So from about 1970 something till 1988, you had the Plato Corrections, PCP. What is that, and what's your role in that?
Well, PCP. By the way, it was originally called the Plato Prison Project, PPP, but you know, too many people said it's the PP Project, and I said, okay, that's not going to work. Talk about acronyms. So, but at the time, and this also came out of Illinois, there was a group of sociologists and architects that were at the forefront of modernizing prisons and describing, I forget what they were called, what their acronym was, but it was quite active in Illinois. And that was a time when the field started describing prisons as correctional facilities. So it was an interesting time because, and that's why, you know, we were invited in by the Justice Department, because they were more about rehabilitation than punishment. You know, of course, punishment, but not exclusively that. Now there's, you know, it's just about putting people there and managing their time there. There's still education that goes on, but it wasn't thought of in this, you know, more, I think, forward-thinking kind of way. I hope we'll get back to that. And the program that I described earlier with Bereiter Engelmann was a preschool program, and for little, you know, kindergarten, first grade, and so on. And I felt that they had kind of figured out what to do with that population. And so I wondered what I would do on the Plato system. And the thing that, when this project came along, I grabbed it. They came to the laboratory, and I spoke up. I said, I would like to, you know, write the proposal for that. And they said, sure, go ahead. And I thought, wow, we could take the same ideas or similar ideas that we had for teaching kids, and now how could we apply that to adults? And so we started implementing programs in adult prisons that were really aimed at the GED, which is the high school equivalency diploma.
Right, outcome based, and trying to have a goal.
Very mastery based, and it was exceedingly successful. I mean, the people who win, we could essentially say with almost 100% certainty that if you went through our curriculum and you did it, you would pass the GED test.
You know, the Plato company, there was a company that came out.
Yeah.
It was still around a couple of years ago. I don't know if it still is, but they were doing some of that still today. I mean,
Yeah.
it lasted
Mhm.
a
It lasted
while. It
a
was
long
one
time.
of the few projects where you see long-term residuals. A lot of higher ed technology projects come and go with the grant money.
Yeah.
and nothing more. So one thing you mentioned Monday, and I read in the book today when I was reading through it, these are expensive machines. And to put them in a correctional facility, you know, was unheard of at that time.
People were really, I mean, the warden and everybody was worried because these were handmade machines, metal
Wow.
casings.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what a prisoner would do with a piece of metal.
Yeah.
They would repurpose it, for those of you who don't know, into a little knife, a stabbing instrument. And yeah, and you know, the keyboards and the keycaps and the letters and, you know, all of it could be pulled out. You could just take the back off and get at this electronic stuff. But what was so interesting, after about the first couple of weeks, it was so successful and people responded so well. I mean, the prisoners, the inmates, the incarcerated guys in these maximum security prisons were so impressed with this and so taken by it that the word went out throughout that prison: you do not mess with this or we'll mess with you. And as I mentioned, not a single keycap was missing in all of those years. Nothing, you know, got destroyed. I don't know. Maybe that's too much of an exaggeration, but you know, so infinitesimal compared to what would be destroyed in a university laboratory, say.
But you need those stories.
Yeah.
To go back to the politicians, go back to the educators, go back to the funders.
Yeah.
They understand that kind of a story. When I was at West Virginia University, we created a learning center for kids at risk in Wheeling, West Virginia. And the governor flew his helicopter, I think, up from Charleston and danced with the kids in the streets. But the one place where we could take a picture was the computer lab.
Yeah.
You take a picture, and then he feels good about the $100,000 he just spent. It's tangible.
Yeah.
Often, change in education comes in through the back door. You have stuff that happens in these computer labs, and it reverberates through. You know, and that's the interesting thing about technology today. It does make a difference. It does have possibilities for changing. We see it with flipped classrooms. You see.
Well, let me tell you an interesting story. You have in these prisons, in a normal, say, classroom, say a classroom in English, where a teacher might come in and say, you know, put a sentence on the chalkboard and say, okay, where does the comma go? You know, how do we punctuate this sentence? Where does the comma go? Well, you have a bunch of tough guy inmates sitting there in front of you. They probably don't know the answer, or they're unsure of the answer. And so what do? And this happens not only in prisons, but in, you know, regular schools as well, is they act out.
Yeah.
You know, they want to act like, you know, what difference does it make? And we're just going to ignore this and make fun of it and cut up in the classroom. And so you have disciplinary problems and no one's learning. But on the Plato system, or on any computer-based system in that sense, it's all private. So if the same question comes up and the person makes a mistake, it isn't announced, hey, he made a mistake.
Right.
It's like it's between you and the machine, and it quietly corrects you and then comes back later and you get reinforcement and practice and so on and so forth. And that's why it was seen as transformative in these settings, because people could really learn and not be embarrassed about what they don't know.
And even today with discussion forums, you don't have to respond in class. You can reflect. If it is social, you can reflect on your answers and change your answers in the discussion forum. So the shy, introverted students that I are very fluent in the online forums.
Yes, exactly.
You know.
Exactly. Yeah, we would notice that on Plato and what we had, they didn't call them blogs back then, there were note files.
Yeah.
And you would see these voluminous notes that people would write, and you'd wonder, like, who's writing all this great stuff? And then you'd find them, and they were the most meek and shy people quite often. You know, they just found the medium in which they could be expressive.
Right. And so Plato, tools came out of Plato, so a lot of social media, blogging, they didn't call it blogging, discussion forums. Did email too?
Email was in different forms, in different places, but I would say we made email more user-centered, more user-friendly was the term then. They were called
screens. Touch
screens.
This is a touch screen.
Yeah.
Anything else I missed?
Well, the whole plasma panel.
Plasmas, yeah.
The fact that the orange glow,
Yeah.
and you get the friendly orange glow there. I mean, it was made out of these little dots, and plasma displays were very expensive, but they were invented in our laboratory at the University of Illinois. I remember when I saw the first plasma display, when I first started there, it was like a square inch, and just displayed a single character. And Don said, this is the future of display technology. Other technologies have come to sort of, I don't know if I'd say outperform it, but competed with it. But the great thing about a plasma display is that it never flickered. So your eyes, you could sit in front of your plasma terminal and my Plato terminal for hours, which I did, and your eyes didn't get as tired as in front of a cathode ray, because a cathode ray is refreshing, you know, so many times.
I remember seeing the screens. I was, you know, a high school kid looking at flick.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and in college too. It's terrible. Finally, before we move on to your career, what makes Illinois, and I'll say Wisconsin and Indiana, special? Why do all of these projects so many come from Illinois or Wisconsin or Indiana?
Or what some people refer to as flyover country. and this is why, by the way, until Brian Deere wrote his book, and a few people wrote some articles, I mean, this history is mostly unknown, because people from the East Coast and the West Coast thought, well, if it isn't MIT or Harvard, or it isn't Berkeley or Stanford, then, you know, it can't possibly, you know, I don't know why it was the Midwest. My sort of funny answer to that question is, well, we don't have mountains, we don't have oceans, we don't have skiing, we don't have surfing. What else are you going to do except invent and study and get smart about things?
Well, smart people. And Michigan too, and Minnesota too. I just got a call before coming from Minnesota.
Midwest friendliness and work ethic.
Iowa, somewhat.
You know, we didn't have a lot of distractions. I mean, we had cornfields and soybeans.
Yeah. And so there is a lot happening in this region. And recently, the federal government is toying with a proposal for funding centers outside of the Silicon Valley. In two of the cities that were named for possible huge monies, Madison, Wisconsin, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, were two of the places that were named. I wouldn't be surprised Champaign gets on that list, but anyways, I forget, it's a joint, it's a bipartisan bill, and it's just, you know, America needs to change. I mean, everyone realizes that with the present political and economic and social and educational climate, things have to happen, and that's one of the ideas I pretty much resonated with right away. Creating innovation centers and pockets of innovation. It's federally, kind of like funding the highway system or funding the, you know, the schools. It's going to be that kind of notion.
I also think if you look at the history of public education, you would see that that was a time when a lot of money was put into public land-grant universities, and which of course were mostly in the Midwest.
Yeah, that's true. And so you're lucky to be at a Big Ten, because that's where it's happening. We've devoted our lives to Big Ten settings, and many of you have as well, or your newbies, your newcomers, enjoy your time at IU. Couple of things that they don't realize: you were the first faculty fellow at Microsoft, this little company. And we never ever saw him again had he stayed, or had he thought, no, Seattle's a good place to live, whatnot. He also was the director of professional services at Authorware, which was bought out or emerged as Macromedia later on, and was later then bought out by Adobe. And then he came here to run the Center for Excellence in Education, which was the purpose behind the building was to create technology, innovation, and change, and trainings, and so forth. And he was the director. Former dean was in charge of the whole. What was his title? Executive.
Well, he was the director of the center, actually, but I became the director of the research for teaching and learning something or other. I forget the full title now.
And I was the first faculty fellow, and I think the only faculty fellow in that. So, and I followed Marty with this wasn't then your only faculty fellow at that, for what that's worth. But Marty's career constantly progressed in many different roles. I'll stop there because there's many other roles right here in informatics. We're in the School of Informatics here. There are a couple of things I was going to say.
Well, we did the first spin-off from Indiana,
right.
the first startup business out of Indiana University was called Wisdom Tools, and that grew out of the center. So those were very exciting times. You have to remember, this was the time when Mosaic, another invention, as I mentioned earlier, out of the University of Illinois, came into existence. Yeah. And I told this story of, it was an extremely exciting time because all of these websites, every day there would be, another 20 websites that people would put up. And
John Savery and I look at them every day in the School of Ed. Hey,
yeah,
there's a new website.
There's a new website. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Somebody, cataloged their records or something. And we kept thinking, what are the new uses for this? And one of the ideas that I really had was the creation of the virtual textbook. Right. How can we use all this technology and create something that went beyond the structure and design of traditional textbooks?
That's just the topic of next week 2 in this class. Mm-hmm. But first, I'll mention, Howard Mellinger was the dean. I forgot to mention his name, so we get that, and he's still alive. But he got the money through lobbyists to build the building. And I was reading about it in the Chronicle
from AT&T
and the federal government and various other sources. It was supposed to be 30-odd million. The School of Music stole 20 million to put a fountain in front of 10 million to put a fountain in front of it, because that's the old School of Ed. But anyways, a lot of money. And Howard was successful in doing that as dean.
It was a lot of money even in today's dollars, but back then it was really a lot of money.
And brick and mortar attracts. I read about it, and that's why one of the reasons I came here. So it brought people to IU. It already had a lot of good people at IU. So you want to talk a bit about what it was like in the School of Ed in the 1990s, running that, or co-running that center?
Yeah, I mean, it was again very, very exciting. My close colleague, it was really the three of us. It was Howard Mellinger and a woman by the name of B.J. Ibe, who in recent years moved to Canada, but she just recently retired, and me. And the three of us really ran that center.
Who were the three again?
B.J. Ibe, Howard, and me.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was doing the research and development part. She was doing teacher education,
teacher training in the whole state.
Teacher training for the whole state of Indiana. We had dozens and dozens of teachers and workshops coming through there all the time. In the summer, it was just sort of packed with activity. Wow. And and so whatever we built in the laboratory, and Sonny Kirkley, by the way, was an early graduate student who came in.
Yeah.
Where was he from?
He also, he's
from
from
the
North
South,
Carolina.
North Carolina, yeah. And he came in, and I remember he talked to me, or he met me. He says, "I want to be a part of this." I said, "Great, you'll be a graduate assistant here."
Yeah.
And so he
spun out a company.
He spun out. Well, we actually started Wisdom Tools together, and then something else happened. I had brought back. I had been out to Apple Computer, visiting a friend there, and he whispered and said, "I want to tell you something really exciting, Marty, but I can't talk to you about it in Apple headquarters. We're going to have to take a walk." And so we went out. We drove into the mountains of the foothills of outside of San Francisco there, or Cupertino, and he told me about this thing which he described as World Board.
Oh yeah.
And he said World Board. I said, World Board? What an odd name, like the board, the boring world or something. And he said, no, board, B-O-A-R-D, World Board. And I said, well, what the heck is World Board? And he said, well, and we were like walking through like this forest area. He said, imagine walking through this forest and you would see this tree and you'd wonder, well, what kind of tree is that? And you have these glasses that you're wearing, and maybe you touch it or something, and the name of the tree would be there, and the people who passed that tree and described, left you a little message or a note about the tree. And I said, oh my God, the whole idea was information in place, rather than going to a web address. Now any object could have information embedded in it.
Keep in mind, it's 25 years ago. And that's when I started working on this book, Electronic Collaborators. And they wrote the 14th chapter in the book, included World Board, included some kind of study forum, or I forget what you called it. But yeah, it was groundbreaking work, the study circles around that.
The study circles. And well, at the same time, I was involved in a project, Adventure Learning, which was started by this guy, Will Steger, who was
right there holding up the IU flag at the North Pole. I was one of those guys.
An Arctic explorer. Curt, I still have that flag. It's just in
I have the picture you gave me.
Oh,
you have the flag. I got a picture.
Okay, and I've always wondered, like, I need to.
Oh, you got the flag that was at the North Pole.
That was at the North Pole,
oh.
and I think, like, I've got to get this to the archives or something, because like, this is historic, right?
Yeah, really.
I don't know if IU flags have flown at the North Pole, but they took it because we partnered with them to do this thing called Adventure Learning, and the idea was you would follow these explorers. Your classroom would follow these explorers, and they would communicate via, I don't even know if we had the internet quite then, or it was early days of the internet, but they certainly didn't have internet in the North Pole, so they had to use military satellite communications. It was quite an undertaking, but they would like write these messages about what was happening to them, and the kids would experience that adventure. But we didn't just want them to be passive observers of adventure,
right,
and to see, okay, let's see what a group of wealthy white guys can do, but the teachers in their classroom created their own adventure to parallel. So these became sort of leaders and models of adventure, but you'd have your own adventure, which might be like near our school property in Minnesota, there might be a lake that is a dead lake, and how do we bring it back to life? That becomes our adventure. And so, science and everything becomes a part of the curriculum.
not like the little girl in the lake in Minnesota this summer found Norwegian writing, Viking writings and so forth. That's an adventure in and of itself.
Yeah,
Week 5 of the Monster Syllabus course is adventure learning, extreme learning, non-traditional forms of learning. So if you want to read more about that stuff, or go to the Electronic Collaborators book. It's all Indiana stuff, and that was 1998. We have a chapter with Bill Sugar. We analyzed the level of kids' questions being asked in that World Forum. We looked at perspective taking. Kids were taking on perspectives of different famous people in time, solving different riddles that were sent by the explorers in the North. A lot of cool stuff was happening in this regard. It still is happening in more so. Should happen today, given all the technology.
It's so easy to do these things, things now, but they were, I mean, it was an adventure just to pull off these kinds of projects, right? Because
Virtual Gettysburg, I think there was CNN funded you guys for a while. Turner Broadcasting. Yeah, they funded you. AT&T funded you. Or maybe Ameritech. I don't know.
Yeah,
all sorts of places.
All sorts of places. It's hard to remember now.
Yeah, people come by the truckload, busloads to look at the School of Ed in the 90s. Yeah. That was a happening place. And Marty was, if you were at the Monday's event that we had, he was kind of coaxed into coming to Indiana. He was at Minnesota at the time.
Yeah, it was with Authorware.
With Authorware, and he thought he was going to sell him some Authorware software, and lo and behold, Howard convinced him to come to Bloomington and take on this director job.
And I'm glad that I did. But no, I've had some very interesting chances to do some extraordinary things. I have a couple of stories where I turned down some extraordinary things as well. Could I tell one of those?
Yeah.
So the biggest one, I suppose, happened at Microsoft when I was there. At the end of my second stint as a faculty fellow, this was the end of the summer, there was this guy by the name of Tandy, and I'm blanking on his last name, but he's what is known as a fob. Now, you might think of a fob as
friend of Bonk?
Close. Friend of Bill. Bill Gates. So okay, I'm a fob to you. But, so I mean, they weren't just friends. I mean, to be a fob meant you were part of the very first days of Microsoft, the creation of Microsoft. You were probably the first 50 people that got hired. You know, he knew you by name, and you know, he'd hang out a lot.
You don't need Seattle Seahawks right now. He just stayed, you know.
Yeah, exactly. No, but Tandy Trier was his name.
Yeah. Okay. You guys look that up.
I don't know where he is now, but
spell Trier.
Trier. I don't know. Anyway, I'm sure he's retired by now, but he was there, and he said, Marty, would you like to come to Microsoft and you know, be an employee here as an interaction designer
and change the world.
And I said, well, how many interaction designers do you have at Microsoft? He says, oh, I don't know. There's about 3 or 4 of us. I mean, now there's hundreds of people who you would describe as interaction or experience designers at Microsoft. It's not thousands. But you know, to be number 4, and I said, well, what would I be doing? He says, well, you would be working on the design of a project codename Windows. I said, what the hell is Windows? I didn't know what Windows was.
Show me the door.
Show me the door. It just seems so odd. I mean, I'm an education guy, not a window washer. And remember what I said earlier, I don't know anything about computer science. So you know, it just seemed weird. But the real reason I tell this story is not that I talked myself out of probably a multi-million-dollar career, but the reason I tell the story is that I finally admitted years later, the reason I said no was because I was afraid. I was a guy who grew up in the Midwest.
North side of Chicago, south side?
South side of Chicago. Most of my family, all of my family was there. And the thought of, even though I had spent time in Seattle, the thought of actually moving there and moving my family there was just so difficult and strange. I mean, it doesn't seem so strange now to fly and everything, but back then it was a huge commitment. You know, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have easy ways to communicate, so it felt like you were really leaving your family, and that was a scary thing for me. But I was younger, I should have done it. You know, I should have tried for something like that. And I tell young people now, you know, when you get those interesting opportunities and you're young, you know, go for it. Don't let fear prevent you from doing some opportunity like that.
And it could fail, whatever it is. If it fails, a one-year project's okay to have that on the resume. You know, you're involved in something unique, you grew from it, move on from something, you know.
I mean, I had tenure, you know, already at Illinois. So was the idea of, giving that up and doing something. Yes, it sounds exciting, but, you know, they could fire me in 6 months. Probably wouldn't have, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
And it's that unknown that was scary.
We'll have the founder of Flipgrid from Minneapolis, the University of Minnesota, Charlie Miller, come in. I wrote his tenure letter, and full professor probably recommendation. He gave up tenure. They sold Flipgrid to Microsoft, and Microsoft now gives it away free. So we'll come back to this. What's Microsoft doing? We've heard about the past. We'll hear about what's going on today when Charlie comes in. So he had a start. Charlie had a startup, and he has a number of things. He's from northern Indiana, born in northern part of Indiana, which almost became my doc student at one point. But he stayed at Minnesota for his master's and doctorate. He thought about switching down here. But you know, if you go to Brain Giants, all his photography, he's a very creative guy like you, Marty. Creating a startup is not easy. It requires a vision. It requires a heavy dose of commitment, because I had a little company called SurveyShare back in the day too, and I found out I wasn't committed to it. I sold it and to the person. So, do you want to talk anything about running a software company, and that's a long conversation, isn't it?
That is a long conversation, but I'll tell you this.
You tell, and then we'll talk about tiger scenarios.
You know, I've been asked many times, should I do something like this? People who have ideas and they have an opportunity to start a company. And I say, of course you should do it. Of course you should do it, because for one, I'm reflecting back on my experience where I said no and sort of regretted that later on. But the thing is, if people who ran companies told you what really happened, no one would ever start a company, because it is a roller coaster ride of the most intense experience. And you have to be very, very careful about it, in the sense that you can wrap your life so much around that you lose your life. You lose your soul, and you can lose your life literally, in the sense. I remember checking myself into the emergency room, the emergency room of Bloomington Hospital, because I thought I was having a massive heart attack. So they did all these tests on me, and thank God I wasn't having a heart attack. And the doctor looked at me and he said, "Are you under a lot of stress, Marty?" At which point I just started crying right there in the emergency room. And he said, you know, one of the interesting things about the human body is it can mimic, all, heart failure, heart attacks. Really? Yeah. With all these symptoms, but you're not really having it, but your body is just it's telling you, slow down. And I realized I had become the company that I had started, you know, and so that's the downside. But
That's a warning.
That's a warning. But the upside is it's extraordinarily fun because, you know, it involves new ideas, new challenges. You're learning about, in my case, you know, merging technology and education, which I had some familiarity with, but doing it in a business context. I tell students all the time that's who want to do businesses. You know, I usually pull out my wallet at that point and pull a dollar bill out if I have it.
Yeah.
And I say, what do you think it takes to get someone to give you a dollar bill for anything?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about your behavior on the internet. What does it take for you to take out your credit card? Who do you do it for? Amazon? Okay. How many other people do you do it for? Maybe a couple of applications, but it's a big, big deal to have people, you know, pay anything. And it's impressive that there are these businesses that exist. I mean, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of convincing. You have to have the right product at the right time that hits the need of people. And of course, a lot of things came out initially as free products. It's really difficult to sustain a business on free. Most people don't want to work for free. Most university professors, as dedicated as we are to knowledge and science,
And creating free textbooks, whether it's law school like this article, well, eventually they have to think about what they're.
But the only reason they can do it is because someone else is paying their salary, so that they can do it. Most of us would just walk away if they said, "Oh, we're going to a free model here at Indiana University. We're not giving you a salary anymore."
So I remember time-revealed scenarios you had, and it cost $100,000 or something like that for a scenario to be built. It was a lot of money.
Yes, it got down in price, but the whole idea was centered around storytelling. And boy, this is an example of this company being too many years ahead of its time, because today, I mean, you hear storytelling talked about by everybody. Everybody talks about storytelling and the importance of storytelling. But we were sort of pioneers in that, at that time, really pushing it. And we wanted to see how can we teach various kinds of skills, both hard skills and soft skills, through the telling of a story. So it would almost be like, we called it a bird's eye view. You'd be looking down at this story playing out in front of you that would be in episodes. So it would be sort of like a soap opera.
Wow.
And there would be these different scenes. So time revealed was what was going to be revealed, the next episode, the next scene, and you never knew what would happen. So the way the learning took place in this is we would present this scene with different characters, and we'd have the learners predict asynchronously, like not only what would happen next, but what would you do in this particular situation. So, for example, let's just make something up here. You're trying to have a meeting with your dean because you have an idea that you want to get funded or implemented at your university. So you go into the dean's office, and the dean is very friendly and nice and supportive and all of that. And you walk out of that office, you think, wow, I have a deal here with the dean, right? The dean likes me. The dean likes my idea. And so you keep going on ahead with that. But in the next scene, what gets revealed is the dean calls in his assistant dean and says, keep that guy away from me. What a pain in the ass he is. I mean, these things happen all the time, right? So there's all these behind the scene things, And so what is the learning there? The learning there is, all that you see may not be what really happens. This is from like a soft skill sort of perspective. And how do you better prepare? How do you get your ideas implemented, and so on and so forth. So you would have these discussion forums around these little things that would be revealed over time. It was quite interesting.
It was quite interesting. People were about Coca-Cola was one of your customers. Eli Lilly was one of your customers. Who were some of the other?
Let's see, Blue Cross Blue Shield. I know they were a big customer. We had a few universities. I think Northwestern University did a project with us. The business school. Actually, some of the early experiments in online learning that the Kelley School of Business,
which this week is rated number 1.
Rated number 1.
And the School of Ed IST Master's Program is rated number 1. So
isn't that amazing?
Amazing, because I was never a player in online learning early on. The Dean of Arts and Sciences banned online learning. It was a School of Ed. It was maybe a little School of Music, but the School of Ed and School of Business were the leaders, and adult ed too, language ed. And that shows being an early player. Now those are the places that are number 1.
Well, and getting back to getting back to sort of the early days, and what made it exciting is that we were innovators. We were trying new things. It was a very exciting time. But what I said to the class, that on Monday, just the other day, that yes, that was an exciting time in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but in 2020s, it's an exciting time. I mean, every time in technology is exciting, because now we have artificial intelligence that's really maybe finally taking a foothold in some ways. We have big computing, big data,
and learning analytics today.
And these the technology is so advanced and so fast and so powerful. We can do some extraordinary things. Robots. So there will be things that I will never see, but hopefully some of you will. And
we'll have robots in classes as partners in teams within 10 years. They'll have, they'll do the logic.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have things implanted in our brains, I suspect. But, and they all come with a challenge, right?
You don't have something in front of your brain now? I'm only operating because of those chips in my brain.
Well, yeah, I'm going to need one soon, I'm afraid. But these were very exciting times, because we were at the early stages of things, but every time is at the early stage of something.
Yeah. And
so, don't talk about the good old days, just talk about where you're at now in the future. It's so exciting.
Well, there's a couple of lessons. One thing is, you're moved to the School of Informatics. Mm-hmm. This is a startup in many ways.
Startup.
Was it exciting, just as exciting coming to a new school like this in the sense of things? Did that prepare you for what happened here, or were you?
Oh, it definitely prepared me for what happened here. And this place grew like crazy.
Still growing.
And it's
getting funded.
And getting funded and so on. It's a named school now. What do we get?
Yeah,
$60
million.
$60 million.
AI and
there's an AI center. $10 million embedded in all that. I don't know.
Look up Mr. Luddy. This is now Luddy Hall.
Luddy Hall. And by the way, in my undergraduate class, there's a kid with the last name of Luddy, and I wonder, is that the grandson?
Can this kid, is he rich? Can he get me a cup of coffee?
Yes, I need to get to know him. But he probably has no relationship. But these are great times, and everything is always morphing and changing. But even before education, at the University of Illinois, the last department that I joined, I don't know if you knew this, I was a member of the Graduate School of Library and Information Science.
Yes, you mentioned that. I think you said something about being in a library. Yeah.
And you might wonder, like, why? Like, why were you a part of that? And there was a time when the librarians were really ahead of the curve. You know, they talked about libraries without walls, and they talked, you know, about the future of books and digital libraries, and they're still talking about that. But that's where the action was, and that's where I wanted to be for a while.
You like books. Can you tell us briefly about your book that you're writing called Design Habits?
Design Habits, well, actually, I'm probably going to change the name. I don't know what it's going to be called now. And I'm probably been changing the nature of the book. But I've always been interested in design pedagogy, and that's really what the book was about. But I think I want to really reflect on my career, but also reflect on like deep sort of learning that I've gotten out of working in the field of technology and education. And, you know, how do you make people smart? I've always been interested in that question. How do you make people smart about anything?
Is that why you kind of shifted your career from quantitative stuff to more qualitative? Is that part of that?
That's part of it. I mean, I began to realize that quantitative, which I was trained in, was just one of many lenses.
Factor analyses, voodoo statistics.
Yeah. So, you know, at Illinois, when I was a graduate student there, I took every statistics class available at the university. So, yeah.
Like I didn't do good in programming, we could handle statistics.
No, I was really good at math. I just didn't get programming. I didn't have that engineering mentality. But I sort of lost, the book, the nature of the book. I'm interested in now, like when someone is a designer, what are those deep skills that they need in order to be a designer? And I don't want to state anything or reveal anything right now, but I'm really thinking about that. And of course, in a very deep sense, it connects to what do you need in order to be successful at life. So I'm trying to draw the connections between these two things. I don't know, it seems like a senior level thing you do.
You should be doing. You should be doing.
You know, reflecting on something like that.
Final question, do you see a common thread in your career or a progression? Because Marty has been many things. Not only running a startup and what was your title at Plato? Many titles probably. The last title.
I was the director of the education program there, but
director of stuff.
Director of stuff, associate director, assistant director. I've been everything.
He's director of the Center for Excellence in Education, a famous place. Associate dean of grad studies and research here, another famous place. As executive associate dean of informatics, director of grad studies, department chair. I mean, you know, you've done a lot.
Okay, but what's the thread that goes through all of this?
And any advice?
So, if I had one word to describe me, I would say teacher. That's what I care about most. And it goes all the way back to the early days, teaching those educationally disadvantaged kids that I thought were gifted kids.
Yeah.
I recognized then and I recognize now that what we do can make a significant difference in the lives of children and of adults, of graduate students, of anyone really. And you know, we talk about the changing economy, what's happening in the Midwest, how manufacturing. Right. We're going to need to retool people. How are we going to do that? I mean, these are educational challenges, and that's what's always motivated me. It's not the technology so much. Right. Yeah, that's just a vehicle. Right. But it's how do we help people? The two words I would use are competent. How do we get them to be very competent in what they need to do, but also confident? Yeah. So competence and confidence, feeling good about yourself, and making a contribution to the world. That's who I am. That's what I do.
And you can read about them in this book, The Friendly Orange Glow. And you can borrow from me if you'd like to. You know, so you get Marty in this book. There are other books I recommend for your midterm. You remember Machines of Loving Grace and The Innovator by Walter Isaacson. There's lots more people in the world who've changed in the world just like Marty has been doing. With a little gift. Wow. So a little gift there. And a little gift, my recent MOOCs and Open Education book. It's signed by all four, and I've sent it in a box. It went around the country. It just came back. I got 10 signed copies. That is one of 10.
Oh, wow.
You got an original, you know, so it just came out.
And can I say something about you? Because, you know, Dr. Bonk, Curt is, I mean, you know, you could call him crazy, but I've just been pleased. But I've just been in awe of your energy and all that you do and doing this class. And I see how much people just love you all over the world. You've been all over the world. I don't know how many countries and how many miles you've traveled. A lot. But you've brought, you know, learning and knowledge about computing and technology and instructional design to people all over the world. And surely it has had a tremendous impact. So I guess what I want to say to you, who may not know, you know, the class that you signed up for, you are really, really fortunate to be in his course. I said this on Monday, and I really mean it. It's not just a kiss-ass moment so I get, you know, nice gifts. It's really, I believe that sincerely. You know, I've served on committees with you. You're so precise. You work so hard. You know, I don't know why you're still married, or you know, why you're not. Maybe you're not. Are you not married?
It's on tape.
But you know, because you know he just worked so damn hard. You're very, very lucky to have him. He is. There's a reason why he puts together this gigantic syllabus.
The monster syllabus.
The monster syllabus, because you know he know it's all in his head somewhere. He's talked to these people. He's made alliances. It's amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty. It's been great having you here as week 1 guests.
Yeah. And if you want to, any of you want to write to me, my email is msiegel, MSIEGEL @indiana.edu. Feel free to write to me. I'd be happy to correspond with you, or come to Bloomington and we could go out and have a tea together.
We're just 2 Midwest Indiana guys now.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you.
I'll send this to the cloud.